Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello, and welcome to the Humanist Perspective, brought to you by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association. My name is Beth Deitch, and I'll be your host for this show. I'm membership coordinator for NOSHA, and I sit on the board of directors. You can go to nosha.org to get more information about us and about humanism. This show is going to be one of our little informal in-group chats with friends and fellow NOSHA members. And I am joined today by McKinley, who is also a board member of NOSHA, Marla Johnston, and Michele Dupre. And you may notice that we have an all-female group today, and that is intentional because our discussion topic is very much about women's voices being heard. We're going to be talking about the MeToo movement. And this has become extra relevant to the secular community in the past couple weeks, as we have had revelations that Lawrence Krauss, long considered a star of science and the atheist movement, turns out to have a long history of inappropriate behavior. We are not, though, going to really focus on that specific case so much as the broader Me Too movement and its implications. Anyone who's really interested in the Krauss case, I highly recommend you take a listen to the Serious Inquiries Only podcast, episode 124, which is hosted by Thomas Smith, who is going to be NOSHA's guest in May. But this has brought the issue home even though we're skeptics and we're such critical thinkers and all, we still have the same crap going on as everyone else. And you hear people say, oh, I support the Me Too movement, but, and then they say things that kind of sound very not supportive, and I think you don't get it. What would you say the Me Too movement is? If you were going to try and describe it or define it, what would you say it is? Anyone want to?
I think it was just an open declaration to the world that the woman had been violated, and it was a sharing of it was just multiple stories that just came bubbling up. It was like this pot of tragedy was coming to a boil. Mm-hmm. So it's varied, and it goes across this continuum, and that's just, it was amazing how each story just seemed to perpetuate five more, and it caught speed.
That sexual harassment is nigh universal, if not universal.
Yes.
Which I find this sort of an astonishing moment, really. I didn't think this was going to stick around for as long as it has. The Me Too moniker came from a women's sexual assault victims group in New York. A lady named Tarana Burke had this group for 12 years and was running a social service agency and was a little bit shocked to find herself the center of a movement that's been taken up by prominent folks and pushed by Hollywood actors and so forth. And she said, we never got any attention, and all of a sudden now this is not a new phenomenon, but now we're suddenly getting recognition and things are actually happening.
What it seems like to me is new. What I would say I think that this is really about for me is that people are, specifically men who apparently did not realize what women's lives were like, are actually listening to women say this is what our lives are like, and actually caring and grasping that maybe our lives are somewhat different than theirs, that we have different pressures that we face throughout the world, and that the contexts that we move through, both socially and in the workplace and in relationships, is different than it is for men. And, you know, that we're being heard and sometimes believed.
And you and I have been talking for a while, excuse me, about how we find ourselves in this unique period in time where everything politically and all of the news is so bad and so negative that all of a sudden some little sparks of good are coming out of it, because
Right, who would have thought
women's
now?
sexual assault is nothing new. It's nothing new. And I think, like you said, what's going on is people are being blinded by the amount.
Well, yeah, men are so astonished, and many of them are astonished by how unastonished all the women in their lives
Right.
are. They think like,
Absolutely.
oh my God, can you believe this? And every woman they know goes, yeah.
Right.
And they're like, wow, I guess it's real.
Right.
You know, it's like, yeah. And it's amazing that it's happening now. With Trump
Yes.
being elected, you know, it seemed like, oh, I guess we're just okay with someone who's a sexual assaulter, and apparently nobody cares.
Not
And
so
then
much,
lo and
huh?
behold, it seems so bizarre.
a little
That
ironic,
that's
yes.
the point at which,
We push back.
and apparently that's, so we actually start quite the opposite of accepting sexual harassment,
Absolutely.
actually start paying attention to it.
It's almost like his election was the tipping point.
Yeah. So do you think that this is going to lead to any real change in the long term?
I mean, there's sort of two approaches to this type of lasting change, right? The cultural and the policy and political. So we are currently undergoing, I think, somewhat of a cultural acknowledgement, but it will require actual change, you know, so that this type of behavior is not normal. As well as backing of policy. And we were talking earlier about just how difficult it is to agree on policies and what exactly to do. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. And it's a very complicated topic. People tend to like to think of things in black and white. It's not a black and white issue. It's a spectrum.
A massive spectrum.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and I think in terms of policies, it's it started as a workplace thing, and that is kind of maybe a little bit easier to address, or to have some ideas of how to address.
Sure.
For starts, like we were talking about John Besh before this started, and how they did not even have a human resources
Right.
person or anyone. You know, for starters, you
For
need
1,200 employees.
Yeah, someone to go to, and you need a policy and a procedure that doesn't necessarily depend on going to your immediate supervisor,
Yes.
because that may be the person who is the perpetrator. And apparently, after the Besh story broke, all these restaurants were calling the legal groups that do the sexual harassment training suddenly interested in having the training, which I find that's something that I also think of why being taken seriously now is people are scared. And, you know, some people say that's like a bad thing, and oh, guys are scared. And I was like, well, when they weren't scared, they didn't care. You know? Suddenly they're actually caring about what they are supposed to do and not do, and maybe willing to make some changes because they are scared.
Or think twice before,
Right.
you know, acting on
Those
those urges. You know,
Right.
what could possibly come of this? You know?
Right,
Is
right.
it going to be, you know, broadcast on a larger platform?
And it does get murkier when we get outside
Yes.
of the workplace. And I think the Me Too movement is clearly encompassing a larger picture of how women are simply sort of sexualized and battered by these things at every turn, you know, even from whether you feel comfortable going out by yourself after dark or walking someplace alone, and how we restrict our lives all the time because of fears for our personal safety. And so it's beyond just the workplace, but it gets harder to say exactly what is wanted when you get into the more interpersonal realm.
We're socialized with very clear gender disparities, and also with a sort of an antiquated. That's it.
Yes.
Sort of sexual script, right?
Right.
You know, sort of chase
Right.
and trap and.
Right.
You know,
Well, the idea that if she doesn't say no
Right.
and smack you in the face, you're good to go.
Well, and even if she does, she may not mean that.
Right.
you
Right.
know,
So the default. We always think that somehow it's we've acted like it is so horrible for a guy not to get sex when maybe he could have. That so he has to like try it, because if he could have and he didn't actually get it, that would just be some horrific tragedy. But we don't seem to care about the result or the errors in the other direction then that leads to. Then that obviously leads to times when you shouldn't have, and you did. And it's, I think, getting across the message that you can just, if you have any doubt, you can just stop. And if she really wants it, she'll let you know. But if you have any doubt, don't be like, I have a doubt, so I guess I can push more. Be, I have a doubt, so I guess I should stop. And ask, are you into this? Are you anything?
Right, and there is a difficulty in communication.
Right.
You know?
And we're not taught that communication.
No, we're not.
You know,
In fact, I just got finished reading Mary Beard's Women in Power, which is, she's a history professor at Oxford, and she's been violently trolled online.
I'm sure.
And she actually managed to befriend some of her trolls and became famous that way. But she also gave a series of talks about women in power, and it was very interesting because it sort of reminded me that this is not a new problem. She points out that this is a long-standing problem of many thousands of years.
Right.
And this is nothing new either. So this is especially astonishing right now.
Well, and you talk about her being relentlessly trolled, and that is something that I really cannot fathom, is the way there are some people who apparently seem to think that women get something positive out of making sexual harassment claims. You know, and certainly we are seeing with Lawrence Krauss and our own movement, there are definitely apologists, people who should be critical thinkers and look at the evidence. And I think I saw somebody on Twitter said something like, this isn't really a he said, she said, this is more like a he said, 50 plus other people and lots of official documents said. Gee, it's hard to know who to believe. And yet there are people casting aspersions on, oh, they just want to take him down. And for what?
Yeah,
for why? I don't know what good they think that brings to women. It's horrible. You're going to be harassed and possibly driven offline forever. Maybe you lose your job. There's nothing fun in it.
I think there's some type of person that sees things as a win-lose. You know, and so if one party loses, another party must win. I think that, and that kind of applies to sexual assault too.
So that if the guy basically loses,
right, then she must win.
She must
gain
win
something.
somehow.
But I think that's a really good dialogue to have. Well, what does she win? What exactly is she getting out of this? You know, can you explain that to me? And that's a good way to open those conversations.
Yeah, I've never heard a really good response to that though. Of, oh, they just want to bring him down, or you're jealous, or you were rebuffed. There's that's always one, you know, that you were rebuffed by this person that you really wanted, and so now you're vindictively accusing them, and it's crazy, and yet we hear it over and over and over again.
I will say that I was particularly, I felt very happy that this Me Too movement that sort of started in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein being just toppled over, and the Rose McGowan movement that transpired. But there was the Olympic athletes from the United States that somehow gained enough strength to really swim upstream against what had occurred to them.
You mean the gymnasts?
The gymnast. And, you know, occurred to them by the physician. He's been convicted and he's in prison now. And that's happened very quickly over the last few months. It gave them their voice, and that was hard for them to speak up. And some of them are still underage at this time.
Rocks, though. Who made him sit and listen to all of it.
And you just have to wonder that their parents and their coaches and all the other people that touched upon these incredible careers they had, did no one have a hint?
No, they knew. That's the thing. There were complaints. And that's something, if anything comes out of this, is that hopefully people start taking these complaints seriously. Because you find out in things like that they reported it. They reported it to various people, and no one took them seriously. You know, and so you find in a lot of these cases that when they finally come to light, that they're reported and they're either dismissed, or if something's settled, it's done so very quietly. And, you know, like apparently Lawrence Krauss was this great big open secret amongst all the like A-listers in the secular movement. I didn't know that, you know, lots of people didn't know that. I've gone to conferences with him, I've had conversations with him. I didn't know that I'm standing next to a predator because everyone kept it quiet. He gets banned from the campus of Case Western, but by that time he's at Arizona State. Do they tell Arizona State? No, you know, and so everybody thinks they're the first one. Everybody thinks they're the only one. And that has impeded women getting together. I think that's part of why this has snowballed so, is that once somebody does speak up, they go, hey, me too, you know? But somebody had to first speak up, because until then everyone thought they were the only one.
Well, that's very true. I mean, Darren Sharper, the football player, had cases here in Vegas and I think LA. So he was the gentleman with a couple of deputies from St. Bernard that he hired to go out with him to the clubs that gave the girls a lot of drugs with their drinks and then took them back to, and they all participated in this. They're all in, and that too is also a heinous sexual assault.
Right, right. Well, and there's not just the actual perpetrators that should have a reckoning, but also people, men mostly, who hear about these things or see these things or know about these things and do not do anything. You know, and do not say anything, that they're like, well, they're good guys, and they thought that was really creepy, but it's like, did you confront him? Well, no, yeah. And it's like, then you're not really helping. You're not an ally. And I guess that's a question. What do we expect of men who say, I support the Me Too movement and I want to be an ally? What would we tell them that requires of them?
Well, we hear a lot of talk about, oh, you're not allowing due process for this poor man. And my response to that is, you are still privileging the perpetrator over the victim, because the deck still seems to be hugely stacked against the victims.
Right.
I mean, you know, you say corporations have done this, they have HR policies and things like that. In general, my experience has been those are not worth the paper they're written on. And if you do report it, the HR department is very likely to just ignore it or bury it, or
or like in that Uber one saying, well, he's a high performer. We don't want, we don't want to do anything about that.
So, and it does turn very rapidly into this sort of he said, she said thing, with the perpetrator more likely to be believed. And, you know, this is a difficult cultural assumption to get over, because it's true. We don't like to be unfair to people. We don't like to think that people are awful. If you are part of the problem, you don't like to think that it might be me. You know, it might be part of this. It's a number of uncomfortable assumptions that we have to figure out a way to make life better for everyone.
Right, and we have decided that, because there's errors either way. You can have the errors of like over-believing, let's say, and so that even you may have false accusations, although I still have to think those are exceedingly rare. And then there's the under-believing, which then means that women are damaged and harmed and driven out. And we apparently haven't cared about that error.
As much as we care about
we are willing to have
accusation.
thousands, millions of those errors to make sure that no one man gets wrongfully accused. And we're using, even with the words of like due process, we're using the language of a criminal case, which, first of all, some people apparently think that all Me Too means is we're finally going to actually prosecute rapists. But it's like, no, we're talking about things that may or may not rise to the level of criminal sexual assault.
And the burden of proof is on the victim.
But I feel like it should, the reason a criminal case uses the standard of wanting to be certain beyond a reasonable, or without a reasonable doubt, is that this is the state. The case is not actually the victim versus the accused, it's the state versus the accused. The state is looking at locking up someone, taking away their liberty, and we consider that to be a really serious thing, that the benefit of the doubt should go to the citizen and not the state. It seems to me that these cases would be more appropriately modeled on a civil suit, where you have two parties contesting with each other, in which case the standard for decision is more likely than not. You know, it's a 51% proof burden, basically, one way versus the other way. And because we have two parties here, both with something to lose, it seems that the woman's side should also have as much benefit of the doubt before she has her liberty infringed upon by having her driven out of spaces, driven out of events. There's a guy who collected a bunch of comments on Lawrence Krauss from various other scientists and people who were around him, and one of them, a theoretical astrophysicist, a woman, says, "I've spent my career avoiding places where Krauss was. I missed conferences, award opportunities, and job opportunities. The men around me didn't have to. They didn't have to worry. Women and gender minorities miss out on so many opportunities because of men they know to be harassers. Men continue to work with them." And it's like, where was her due process? Where was her due process to not be driven out of conferences and career opportunities and things? Are we so concerned with her not being unfairly restricted? No, why not? Why are we so concerned with there not being one error in the falsely accused man direction that we're willing to take a million errors in the unjustly restricted women direction? You know, so that's my little rant. Sorry.
Where's her safety?
Yeah.
You know, where's her safety guaranteed?
Right. And this isn't the state against somebody. This is two parties who both should have equal interest and weight.
And protection.
Yes. And then we
Absolutely.
should look at the evidence and see whose way is more likely than not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, it's a great point, but I think that we still have such incredible gender bias out there in the workplace that we know that women are underpaid for doing the same jobs and that men are preferred to be selected despite their qualifications.
Right.
So absolutely, the poor men.
Right. Especially if you're in a male-dominated field, men have that assumption of competence until proven otherwise. Women have the assumption of incompetence until proven otherwise. Yeah, so you're already sort of a leg down. And our time is already like flying by. One thing I do definitely want to talk about that is something that Michele and I have talked about a bit, is the idea of redemption. Whether there is any possibility of redemption for, well, there's for perpetrators of varying stripes. There's also for the apologists, the people who have come to their defense and we've finally just kind of written them off, and people who are clueless. And sort of what is too far to ever be forgiven? Who might we forgive? What would we want to see in order to forgive somebody? And what does it mean to forgive?
Well, I know that you and I joke about a spectrum of offenders from Bill Cosby to a Louis C.K. and that's sort of, or even a Bernie. We'll do a Bernie at this other end.
Yeah, what did Bernie do?
Bernie Sanders. No, not Bernie Sanders. Sorry, God, I've lost my mind. Al Franken.
Al Franken, okay.
So sorry.
I was like, what did Bernie Sanders do? Oh, no. Al Franken,
I was
gotcha.
thinking people I love.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we've got a spectrum, and maybe we can just put their faces at different,
really.
points on
That
this
actually would be a funny little graphic. I'd see him with the little face.
Maybe we could come
Except
up with
maybe
that.
Louis C.K. It should be another
It's
part
like
of his
a
anatomy.
voting system, You're a 7. You're an Al Franken.
But what do we want to see? We were talking about the non-apologies before we got on here, and what is a good apology? Let's say it's not someone who has actually criminally raped somebody. Let's say it's someone who's been a little harassy, a little grabby.
Well,
Are they able to redeem?
This is something people have a difficult time with this whole gender disparity issue altogether, is that, yes, there's a difference in a way between a pat on the butt and raping someone.
And personally, I'm annoyed at the people who act like we don't know that.
Part of the same spectrum.
Sam Harris
someone
mansplained
who
that so
assumes that
nicely.
they can do whatever they want, right, to someone else, whether they want it or not. And I think your apology needs to reflect that as well. We haven't gotten a lot of apologies. We've gotten a certain of, oh no, I respect women. If you thought that was the problem,
I'm sorry.
Then I'm sorry that you were offended.
They also need to not be vague. There's so many vague. I may have done some things that were inappropriate, and if that's the case, then I sincerely apologize. It's like, you don't show us that you know what you did and you know why it was wrong. They need to specifically own up to specific offenses and specific wrongs to specific people and say this was wrong because, without any might have, if you were, kinds of things. And really, I think, let the wronged person say what amends they might want them to make. Say, I was wrong, this was unconscionable, I should not have done this specific thing. Is there anything I can do to help you? You name it, And no, we aren't seeing any of that kind of specificity at all. We're
Or
just
active
sort of,
voice, a lot of passive voice.
yes, good point, very passive
Or
voice.
refocusing the spotlight on themselves, not on the victim.
Kevin Spacey, anyone?
John Bash.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a difference, too, between debasing yourself, which I think people who have been accused feel like people want them to do and they're not going to, and, sincere apology.
Right.
And
You have to show you know what you did wrong. And that's what I think
Or
is
at least
lacking from so many of
self-awareness,
them. So that you know what not to do in the future. I guess, and also a very clear statement of what you'll do differently in the future.
yes.
I was going to say, how about a promise not to do that again?
Yeah.
What
yeah.
I've learned, going
Specific
forward, I will
steps.
not do this again.
Right.
Owning it.
Yeah. And, I think with some people, maybe there's the difference between forgiving you but then letting you get back to a space of admiration or power. Maybe I can forgive what you did, but you don't get to be a treasured star anymore. You shouldn't be the CEO anymore. Stardom and power is what you showed you couldn't handle. And we've talked about whether you can separate the art from the artist. Can you still watch House of Cards? Can you watch Woody Allen movies? I feel so sorry for everyone else on The Cosby Show. All those years of wonderful work they did that no one wants to watch now.
Right.
It's, can we just enjoy these things now, or do we kind of have to think about that?
Right. Is it still valuable as a
Yeah.
family drama
Right.
that my family watched? That was.
So, believe it or not, we are at the end of our time. Can you believe it? I know, that just flew, didn't it?
Yep.
So, we'll have to get together again and pick this up some more. Because that did just totally fly by. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface of some of these very interesting concepts. So, Anne, Marla, Michele, thank you very much for coming. Good discussion, and thank you out there for watching, and I hope you will join us again soon.